Sup, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this rip of TFTC. Thank you for joining us. Give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel. If you catch us on podcast apps, make sure you subscribe there. Give us a rating, a review. Go to tftc.io as well. Become a member of the site. Join the conversation. Truth for the commoner, trying to get you the high signal content in a world gone mad. This rip was brought to you by our good friends at River. River's here to make it as easy as possible for you to buy Bitcoin and then take it into self-custody. Go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today, and you'll get $5 of Bitcoin after you buy $100 worth of Bitcoin on River. You can dollar cost average into Bitcoin with no fees. If you're just buying one off, River has the best fees in the industry. They back all their Bitcoin reserves 1-to-1 in multi-sig cold storage. They highly recommend that you take self-custody. They just introduced limits. So if you want to set a limit order below or above the current Bitcoin price, River makes that extremely easy as well. They also have real customer support. You can pick up the phone and call them if you have any questions about your experience on River. So go to river.com/TFTC, set up an account today. Enjoy this rip.
So are you on an MS-13 list?
I was told to behave as if I am, but there was this funny little synchronicity that happened after I'd spent a couple days just like nailing down the final draft of the article I wrote on like the history of MS-13 and what Bukele did to, finally defeat him once and for all. And after this, it was like kind of late at night. I was tired. I'd been like writing for hours and all. I go hit up Chipotle for like a 10 p.m. burrito bowl, and I'm there in line, and this group of comes and gets behind me in line, and here they're talking Spanish, and I turn around, and the guy has a clear tat on the side of his face that's like it was an M13. And I just started to get like kind of skits out and paranoid just from that. But it's there's these guys are still out there in America, in states like Virginia. It's been a problem since like the early 2000s, even in affluent suburbs of Washington D.C. like Fairfax County. School systems have been having to deal with this kind of thing for a long time, and like students getting involved in it and all. So it's been an ongoing issue. They've tried different tactics. There was a attorney general in Virginia. He had some interesting ideas, like putting in these tattoo removal parlors, to try to get trying to create these programs for rehabilitation and stuff. Varying degrees of success. I think the Fed cracked down, like the FBI during the Trump administration. They went pretty hard on some of the gang prosecutions, and that seemed to have tamped it down quite a bit. But in the past couple of years, like the ambient crime levels have been rising in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, and whether that's linked to the gangs officially or not, it's a lot of it's being caused by the same people, and that's just something that I haven't seen a strong federal response from the Biden administration on this. So at least not in terms of prosecutions and things, but I guess they have bigger fish to fry, like Donald Trump.
Yeah, they're not prosecuting anything these days. Yeah, it's really perplexing. So to set the stage for this conversation, we briefly met at an event last year. I've been following you on Twitter since even before that event, and I think I had this picture of you in my mind and your worldview just from following you on Twitter and meeting you briefly that is extremely not by picture. I think you are an extremely fascinating person from what I've observed from arm's length on Twitter. And I think to start this conversation, I was like, what drove you to focus on all the subjects you do, whether it's MS-13 in El Salvador, the state of the United States more broadly, your work at IM 1776, like what drove you to cover and speak out against all this stuff?
Well, like starting with El Salvador, I'm from a part of Virginia that has a significant El Salvadoran population. So I've felt for a while that a lot of our histories and, culture, like they're distinct cultures and distinct histories and all of this, but, they've been like in this like mixing pot with us for a while. So it's like that was like the big other like group, right? Like, for people in Texas or California, it might be like Mexicans are the other big ethnic group. For people across the South, it might be, if they're white, blacks, but if they're blacks, they're white. But, for me, it was like the El Salvadorans are like, that's the big other group. And, it's, it always found them kind of interesting, and they did keep to themselves a lot. I remember growing up, and I could tell there was a lot of really they'd been through a lot of heavy stuff. I think because of that, like closing off, and I don't know, they just seemed like as a people really beaten down. And a couple years ago, I started seeing like Bukele's face, right? Like at pupuserias and all of this stuff. And it's kind of like he was displayed in the Salvadoran businesses the way that the Pope is displayed in Italian restaurants, or at least in like the old school Italian restaurants in America. And, I was seeing some of what he was tweeting about. Like one was I think it was in 2001 when El Salvador made a dramatic about face on COVID. And
21.
Yeah. Initially, they had pursued a strategy just kind of in line with World Health Organization guidance and all this. But then it's like by the following spring, I think they had just realized, this is going to put us into like permanent debt. Like this is blowing things up. It's nuked the economy. And the about face was, it was like what I would have designed if you had just put me in charge of coming up with, the public health plan, which basically like encouraged people to get outside, get sunlight for vitamin D, because we know vitamin D status was the biggest risk factor for COVID mortality, and lifting, any restrictions. There were no vaccine mandates. There were no entry mandates into the country, so you could travel there as an unvaccinated American, which the way things were going at the time made it one of the few countries where that was possible. And so just, seeing for a while the success they were having in governance and embracing like Bitcoin and freedom. And at the same time, being realistic, not being like dogmatically libertarian, as in if we make the police go away, then that's going to cure everything. Like they were the right kind of Austrian. They took the right lessons from like Hayek and those kind of guys, right? It's the right mix of like pragmatism and libertarianism to me. And so I decided about a year ago, I was like, I should finally go check this place out. And I went down last March, and I've been back 5 times since. So I love it. And it's convenient. It's like a 3-hour flight, and usually like a couple $100 on Avianca. Really easy to get in and out of there. Great airport. And it's a country about the size of New Jersey, so it's not that daunting to travel around. You can be from the beach to the summit of a volcano in like a couple hours. So that's really cool. It's like for such a small country, there is like a pretty diverse array of like topography and landscape and all.
Yeah. So I haven't made my pilgrimage to El Salvador yet. It's on the list. And it is fascinating. So obviously El Salvador, Bukele, what he's done in the world of Bitcoin is something that everybody's been paying attention to for many years now. I mean, he sort of planted the flag. It was like, yes, we're going to embrace Bitcoin as Bitcoiners. we're very much in favor of that, or a lot of us are. I won't speak for all of us, because there is a contingent of the Bitcoin people who are into Bitcoin. I hate to say Bitcoin community, for lack of a better term, Bitcoin community, who view what Bukele has done as fascist in some way or another. And I tend to fall on the side of like, what you just described is like, I think his implementation of bringing rule of law to the country was not only very successful, but very necessary considering.
Yeah. And that's a view that, frankly, is ignorant and kind of insulting to Salvadorans, because if you, and I think I have like a strong reaction to this because I've talked to so many Salvadorans who've told me what things were like before, and the entire country was a prison. You know, you're talking about, people are complaining about, well, you locked up 60,000 people, you're depriving them of their freedom. Everyone was deprived of their freedom. You couldn't leave your neighborhood unless you paid an extortion fee. You know, mothers kept, there were some kids who like, they never really got out and about because their mothers like kept them inside all the time and like homeschooled them. You know, so you had this, I mean, and that's a prison. It's not a formal prison governed by a state, but you are, you're not free to come and go as you please. And so in effect, every poor neighborhood in the country was like a prison, and those people have been liberated. And there's now this like outpouring of freedom in the streets. Like there's like sports are being adopted that they hadn't seen much of before. Like biking, a lot of Salvadorans have got into road biking. A lot of the kids have gotten into skateboarding, like skate culture has taken off there. That. And, you know, just like this flowering, and even without like specific sports or whatever, it's just like there's a lot of families, they can go to the parks, they're going to the plaza. So people are just going out into public. Feels very different than America, where people now, I think, like they treat their suburban houses like castles. There's not much of like a public space that many people go to. It's like, you know, the space is kind of, we've Brazilified a lot. I've actually noticed this since 2020, just in like people's space, their habits, like what spaces they go out into. It's kind of wild to watch that happen.
Well, expand on that. Like, what do you mean by Brazilify?
Well, in Brazil, you have this situation where, you know, the streets and public squares and that sort of thing, people would like avoid them, or at least avoid them during certain times. I mean, I had a gun put to my head on a residential street one quiet morning in Rio, and it was in a nice neighborhood. I was getting in an Uber, but I was like transiting like between two secure points. One was like the gated condo I was staying at that had an armed guard, and then like the moving car. And it's like that slight in between time when you're a target. And this dude rolled up on a motorcycle and robbed my phone. After putting a 1911 to my head. That was
when was this?
Experience. That was in like I'm trying to think what year. It was right before Bolsonaro was sworn in. I remember because I was there. It was like the week after that was his inauguration. So I guess that would have been like 2018, like January 2018 or so. Because I think he got in like, I think the election for him was like a year after Trump. Anyway, whatever it was. But I remember the next time I went back, Rio felt much, much safer. Like there was a very appreciable difference in the security situation once Bolsonaro took over. Not that much had to be changed. It's just like he let the police off the leash and it was like, actually, yeah, go take care of these guys. There had been a hostage situation on a bridge between Niterói, which just sits across the bay from Rio, and Rio. And they brought in a sniper and shot the guy who was holding these people hostage. They just the government started like publicly, you know, being more hardcore. And it sent a message that took effect very quickly.
Yeah.
But back to the Brazilification. Before that, things had gotten so bad from a security perspective that like if you were going to go somewhere and just like walk around like in public, it would be like one of these really nice luxury shopping malls that you can see favelas from. Like the contrast between poverty and ultra wealth in Brazil. Like it sits next to each other, at least in places like Rio de Janeiro, because they're all packed in. You know, it's very dense. And you know, a lot of people would just avoid these like public areas that theoretically should be secured by police, or by culture, but in reality were places where you could be mugged. And, you know, so Brazil had this like decline of the third space happen like at least a decade before the United States. And, you know, I don't think it's gotten quite that dire here, but in a number of cities, I have noticed like, okay, people don't want to take subways. They don't want to take public transportation. They don't want to walk places. They're like avoiding these, you know, public areas that should be controlled by the police or secured by the police, and instead, you know, opting for like safer measures to get from point A to point B. And I think part of it is it's not even like the serious crimes. It's just like the low level harassment by the homeless and mentally ill.
Mm-hmm. Happens here in the city.
Yeah. Well, I was in New York about a month ago, and yeah, I was shocked at how much I still love New York City. It's probably an unpopular thing to say these days, but and I think there's a lot of great qualities to it as a city. But you know, riding on the subway used to be just like a very normal experience, and like now you will see something. I feel like whether it's someone like openly defecating on the train platform or having schizophrenic episode in the train car you're in. It's just like there's this like background ambient level of stress that goes up.
Yeah, no, it's been growing for the last decade. So I moved to New York from Chicago in 2014. I put 6 years in there between 2014 and COVID. And it was a noticeable difference from when I first moved there, even before COVID. Like I remember my wife and I lived in Williamsburg. It was before we had children. And towards the end, like 2019 predominantly, like I remember 2 instances where we were coming from the West Village back to Brooklyn on the L train, and 2 separate times, probably around like 10:30, 11 at night, both times, like some dude just whipped out his dick and started like massaging himself like on the L train in front of me and my wife. It was just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
This was before COVID. Like we were smart enough to get out of the city like March 6th, 2020. Our first son was just born. We're like, we're not staying here for these lockdowns. So we escaped to the beaches of New Jersey, and we went back. We thought we were there for 2 weeks. When it became apparent the lockdowns weren't going to be for 2 weeks, we're like, all right, we're canceling our lease. We had to go back and wind down our apartment and get all of our shit and move it to a storage unit. And when we went back, we lived on North 5th and Wythe when we were in Williamsburg, so right down the street from Joe's Pizza. And we couldn't even go and get a slice without my wife getting catcalled. It was just pure anarchy during that time. And then I'm originally from Philadelphia. Haven't lived in the city for 15 years, but my family and all my friends from growing up are still there. And you can't even be in Rittenhouse Square past dark without getting harassed these days.
Is that named after Kyle Rittenhouse? Or?
Maybe not.
Should be.
It should be. I met him once. It was just a funny interaction. I did something for, it was on Glenn Beck's show, and he showed up right after I interviewed with Glenn Beck and was like, oh, you're Kyle Rittenhouse. Good shot, sir.
Good shot, yeah.
I forget who, I should know this as a native Philadelphian, who Rittenhouse Square is named after.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the other things that's hit Philadelphia hard has been the fentanyl epidemic.
Oh, yes.
It was, I think, one of the first places where Trank started showing up, which is this additive, xylazine. You can get it for like $10 a kilo from Shanghai. You can order it directly. Mm-hmm. And this had been a problem on the street for months and months. And like I looked into it and I found like it's not even on the schedule, and it won't even like raise like Customs and Border Patrol doesn't even track it because it's like so unlisted. Like they don't even the DEA doesn't even know how many tons of it are coming into the United States annually. And I started like researching into this and that, tweeted about it some. And what was cool is there was a congressional staffer who followed me, or saw the post on Twitter, and got his boss to like draft a letter. And it was funny, is like right after that letter was drafted, that was when the White House was finally like, we're gonna need a task force, like 24 hours later. Sometimes cool things can happen from the internet, but it reminds me of something Amanda Milius described. She said, if you wanted to get anything done, you have to go on cable news or something and say it. Like, it's, you know, governing by Fox is kind of the euphemism they use. But it is interesting. Like, that's what people respond to now, is just what becomes discourse in the news cycle. And, you know, in the political system, right? Like, just people want to, issue wise, like they want to focus on what's being talked about, which can be cool sometimes. It's kind of horrifying, because if you have the platforms controlling algorithms that tell you what gets talked about, like that's a powerful form of control. But
I mean, we witnessed that. I got put in YouTube timeout twice during COVID for talking shit on the vaccines. And ivermectin. First it was ivermectin. It was before the vaccines ever even came out. We were saying hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I had a few doctors on it. We're like, yeah, we think this is a good preventative medicine to take if you're worried about getting COVID. And then if you do get it, maybe you should take it as well. And boom, Susan Wojcicki threw us in timeout.
I got banned a couple of times on Twitter until I finally figured out how to talk about it euphemistically without like tripping the censors. But I remember during the time, like YouTube was just nuts. And then also like Instagram, like Meta had went really hard on stuff. Even, I lost my personal Facebook account because I was posting about vitamin D.
What?
You know, it was an old post. It was like from the first month of the pandemic, where I said, like, we don't know much about this, but everyone should be getting as much sunlight as possible, because we know vitamin D is really important for all respiratory diseases. Simple as that. I was saying, look, this works against the flu, colds, all these other things. We can probably infer, even though there's nothing published. So I had all the caveats in there. And still, it wasn't even like a takedown thing. It was like your personal account that you've had since college. You know, it's gone now. You can't like download an archive of photos or anything. It's just, it's a really demeaning experience to go through something like that.
Oh yeah.
You know, I just, now it's like, having social media for personal reasons, it just feels like you're setting yourself up for failure somehow.
Yeah. And the fact that you did that as early on in the pandemic is even more crazy to me, because I vividly remember, again, my son was born right before it became apparent that COVID was a thing. But I think Bitcoiners were on to COVID early, like December, January particularly. And we had a doctor's appointment with my wife before she gave birth to my son. It was like one of the last checkup appointments before she gave birth. And I was freaking out. My wife was yelling at me in the Uber over to the doctor's office, because I was like, I'm going to ask about COVID. Should we be worried? She was like, don't, you're crazy. Like, there's nothing going on here. And I was like, fuck it, I don't care. Asked. And the doctor looked me straight in the face. She was like, you have nothing to worry about. You should be more worried about the flu. And then the fact that it went from something that you should not be worried about to something that you had to censor anybody who was questioning anything the regime was putting out about it. It happened literally within a 6-week period. Yeah.
And they were mocking people. Like, they were saying like, oh, the tech bros down in Austin are like paranoid because they're, you know, not shaking hands at South by Southwest and all. And then, the Washington Post, Vox, all of these vultures. The early thing was like, if you have any concerns about COVID, if you even mention
it was racist.
It's racist. It's coded. It's dog whistles, you know, about Chinese people. It's like, okay, you're calling it a dog whistle, but that's kind of, in that context, it's kind of a dog whistle in and of itself. I'm not saying that they're eating dogs or that's where COVID came from. I'm saying there's a lab in town. And which is like, the funny thing too, is when they tried to say the lab leak thing was racism, if people talked about the lab leak, like they were doing coded racism, it's a lot more racist to say it came from a wet market. Right. You know, like the official line was like, these disgusting Chinese people are eating bats. You know, this is how it happened. Instead of just like, yeah, there was a lab accident and everyone covered it up, as tends to be the case in bureaucracies. Like Chernobyl, the HBO series, it came out like just the fall before. You know, it was actually like, that was a nice reminder watching that before. That was a nice reminder of just how these systems operate. But then it became really horrifying to see the American government do the exact same thing that the Soviets had done in the 80s. As that unfolded, it was, yeah, it was totally nuts. But yeah, I mean, I had the experience of like being called an alarmist and then being called like a denier, and just really without modifying my position much at all.
Yeah. So my position was modified pretty aggressively over that first 6 months of 2020, where in the beginning, before COVID was even talked about on the news, I was hyper worried about it. Like one of those, like we were stocking up on food at the Whole Foods in Williamsburg, wearing masks like 2 weeks before, like getting looked at like we were crazy people. And then quickly by April, I was like, oh shit, I got, this is something else is going on here. Like this doesn't make any sense with the lockdowns and the way they're treating this. And so I had that pendulum swing. Yeah,
especially with the lockdowns, because nothing in the plans leading up to that, like nothing in pandemic planning had indicated that that should ever be an option, because it was understood, you know, even by like people like Fauci, they were saying that, yeah, you don't lock down during a respiratory pandemic. This is the wrong thing to do. And early on, they were really pushing against locking down. It wasn't, I think, until March came along and they started to understand, I think, what could be gained from it, which was the liquidation of the American working and middle class and a massive transfer of wealth via fiat currency, printing just insane amounts of dollars. And of course, as you know, inflation is not evenly distributed. It takes from the people who are farthest away from the central banking cartel that sets around the faucet of the Fed. And yeah, I mean, we just watched the greatest robbery in history play out, and no one's even talking about prosecuting the people responsible.
No.
Well, except Bobby Kennedy. And that's probably why he's polling better than any independent candidate has in 40 years. So we'll see how the ballot access thing goes. I know that like moveon.org, it's like a Death Star of progressive electioneering. They've now moved on to fully focusing on Kennedy, which is pretty remarkable to have such a large democratically aligned organization like totally tune Trump out. Like they're not focused on him at all. They're terrified that they're going to lose Democrat constituencies to Kennedy.
I mean, can you fault people for voting for, if it's a Democrat choosing between Biden and Kennedy, can you fault people? I don't think so. I mean, and that gets like the bigger question that's been nagging me. And I think I've become pretty convinced that I don't think we're going to solve this via the bureaucracy or the political system. Like, I don't think we can vote our way out of this. Am I correct? Or what would you say to that? Like that's why I focus on Bitcoin, going back to the Fed. Like I'm convinced that the lockdowns happen because they need an excuse to print trillions of dollars because there was something structurally broken on the back end of the financial system. You had the repo spasm in September of 2019 that highlighted that there was pretty significant liquidity issues and they needed to fix that. And so the COVID leak was what's the word I'm looking for? It was convenient way to lock down the economy, print trillions of dollars and get liquidity back into the system. And I think until you take the power over those monetary levers away, like voting and trying to work through the bureaucratic system is not going to be productive.
I agree in a sense. The biggest thing I see facing us is a fiscal cliff in 2025. I kind of suspect they might let Trump win just so he's holding the bag when that blows up. However, it's like this irrational thing, I know, but I kind of still, it's like, all right, this is like a last ditch chance to keep from going off script, because when things go off script, really bad things can happen. And, I think coming up with alternatives, working outside of the system, like, all of this stuff is really good, but and essential, and I think long term it is the solution. But I think in the short term, it makes sense to engage at some level, even if for no other reason than political campaigns are often a means by which you're able to get certain messages out to the public about the nature of the system, the nature of things. And so I really like a lot of what Bobby Kennedy has been doing, talking about the Fed, talking about inflation. I mean, I haven't heard anyone talk in these terms since Ron Paul.
Right.
And, there's a lot that can be done administratively in terms of the health issues, the chronic health problems, the corruption within the medical industrial complex, having a Department of Justice. It's like there's not that many laws that actually need to be changed. It's just which ones are going to be enforced. And I think with Biden, we'd just be heading, there's a danger there. We've been flirting like on the edge of World War III for a while. Mm-hmm. And my concern is if we got like tied up into that, it could manufacture consent for like a massively destructive war. But also I could see them trying to do something like that as a way to slingshot out of the economic problems, fiscal problems, kind of the same way that FDR used World War II to slingshot out of the recession or the Great Depression. And, I think in any kind of major confrontation like that, like anything we could do, we should do to avoid. So, I believe, at the end of the day, I'm an all of the above guy. Yeah. Right. Like, let's try it via the political system, but let's not put our faith in the political system. That's like, that might be a Hail Mary to where we could get some kind of Millet type situation, and I think Millet and Bukele are good examples for what can be achieved by going through the usual routes, but with unusual people. Millet in particular, I mean, he's facing a Congress that's dead set against him, but they have taken I think $12 billion cash reserve shortfall at the Argentine Central Bank, and it's now an $800 million surplus in the span of just a few months. I mean, that's from in fiscal terms. He has a great team with him. Policy people he's enabled. Like, you have like actual people who know Austrian economics now running the program, and you see the results they get in such a short period of time. It does inspire you a little.
It's like, God, I've seen what you've done for other people, exactly. And I want that.
And I get some people who are like, oh, okay, well, why should I care about El Salvador or Argentina and any of these places? I was like, so you have somewhere to go to if it really gets, if it gets really weird here. I know a lot of people have done the whole thing. I was born here, I'm going to die here. I admire that attitude, and I have it myself. At the same time, if you have a family and young children, I think you do need to be thinking, at least, in theoretical terms about like how bad are you willing to let it get here?
Well, what's the worst case scenario in your mind? Like what two paths could you see this going down? Maybe it's not just two.
You know, in one case, it could be they reinstitute the draft. They start sending, you know, your kids off to die for Taiwan or Ukraine or whatever proxy they've decided is the, you know, the be all end all. Or, you know, we get, I mean, at the same time, let's say they start World War III. I don't know, we get nuked. That's a pretty bad thing to go through. You know, I think it's a lot nicer to be in Argentina eating steak than, you know, outside of DC, like with your skin peeling off from radiation. Or it just, probably the more likely thing is things just like continue to deteriorate economically and socially and culturally. And you basically would have kids growing up in a country where there's no opportunity. And just a lot of bad stuff, a lot of risk, a lot of good people who suffer in these, in situations where you have these like anarcho-tyranny systems. You know, like you see it now already, the deaths of despair because of so much of the heartland has been hollowed out. You know, I mean, there are great innovations and exciting things happening, going, and opportunities in America and all that, but geographically, they're pretty confined to like a few key areas. Like here in Austin, you know, it's like it feels so different from the rest of the country. But you could drive, you know, 1,000 miles from here and not run into any other place where there's any level of opportunity for young people the way there is here. So, you know, if let's say Argentina became an engine of dynamism and that sort of thing, I think that, you know, I mean, same for El Salvador. Bukele just announced they'll be giving away 5,000 free passports for, you know, doctors and artists, and, you know, just they want to bring great minds to El Salvador to vitalize the country. You know, I mean, that's real vision right there. And I think his ambition is to turn the place into like the Singapore of Central America.
Yeah. It's so frustrating. As an American, somebody who grew up in Philadelphia and really had that sense of how the country was founded and the spirit of the founding fathers imbued in my personality to a certain degree. Maybe it was just because I was more attuned to it and more interested in it growing up than others. But you know, there's, again, that idea that I'm going to stay, hopefully not go down with the ship, but right the ship, something I certainly align with philosophically. And it's just like, what the fuck do we need to do to get this back on the right track, whether it's via the political system, which we're touching on here. Like, I think one thing that you're doing, particularly with IM 1776, I think we need to really instill and ingrain these ideas of freedom and abundance into people. Like, the American populace is literally fat, complacent, and stupid right now. And that's like the big thing. Another big thing in my mind is like, how do you light that fire in people's minds to take agency over their lives and take control back of the country?
It's no easy answer to that.
No, there isn't.
It's there's such a variety of things that I think have people kind of trapped, but you know, there's a lot of programming, there's a lot of beating down. Particular generations, it's like a lot of millennials graduated into the worst job market since the Great Depression. They were getting their feet under them, and then like COVID came along and ripped the rug out again. And yeah, it's just like after a while, people get burnt out and kind of hopeless. And I think COVID is, well, we call it COVID, but it was a number of things. It's everything that happened in 2020 and shortly after, put it that way, the events, because you also throw in the election, January 6th, all of these things that created these current things, right? The things to get everyone scared and hyped up over. I go to other countries, places like Italy, Salvador, obviously, but just all around. And they've bounced back pretty well from the pandemic. Like, you still have this, there's like youth vitality, vibrancies, like return to towns, and, places people are having fun. And there's just like a carefree spirit. And in America, though, it seems like people have just been so beaten down. Like, there's this heaviness that you find almost everywhere in the country. And it's just like an exhaustion. And I think it's because, like, we followed up COVID with, we piled on top of it, right? The January 6th thing, which was like blown all out of proportion into they mention it in the same breath, in the same sentence as 9/11 and Pearl Harbor.
It's disgusting.
Kamala Harris getting up 9/11 and now January 6th, just like pretending to be solemn and all this stuff. And then after January 6th, you had the vaccine mandates that happened after it became very obvious that young people were dropping like flies from myocarditis and other issues, blood clots. And then you had the fall of Afghanistan, which I think we should have got out of Afghanistan, but it was done in like the most sloppy, embarrassing, humiliating way possible. And, it's just been like one hit after another, and
slow building inflation or quick building inflation.
I think that's been one of the biggest psychological for me. Now, I remember when you could like walk around a grocery store and it was a nice experience, and you just, I'll get this. Now it's like, all right, going in with a list, consulting the sale thing. It's like, why does this cost 3 times as much as it did, a couple of years ago? But the thing about inflation that I think drives me most crazy is shrinkflation.
Oh yes,
because that's like that's surreal. It's like, is it just me, or are the candy bars getting smaller, or the bread loaves losing slices? Like, what's going on here? And like my local grocery store, they now sell a half a loaf of bread for what a full loaf of bread used to cost.
I think it's marketed as a half a loaf.
Yeah. A half round of sourdough. But it's packaged in such a way that it's supposed to look like kind of similar. It's just like shorter, and but like Toblerone bars, I think they're one of the ones where they like
take the notches off.
Take the notches off. Yeah. It's just, and then there's also what happens where lower quality ingredients are added in and this sort of thing. It's like all of these ways people try to hide inflation, rationally, you expect it, but it's just the little things of, you swap the sugar for corn syrup and, all of this stuff.
And then
it's nuts.
You're confronted with that reality at the grocery store. And then you go home, you check Twitter, put on MSNBC, God forbid, and the government's telling you, no, inflation's down. It's solved. It's at its lowest rate since before Trump even got in the office. And that's like the Orwellian doublespeak propaganda that's initiated.
And they constantly tell you, well, okay, your groceries cost more. And you tell them that, but wages are up. And I'm like, not if you haven't switched jobs.
Yeah.
Like, no one's getting raises out there. Layoffs are happening. Companies are advertising job positions that they have no intention of filling because they want to appear to like investors and such that they're in a growth mode and they're hiring and all of this. But so much about the economy is just illusory. You know, I've got like friends in tech who they left their jobs thinking they could just, you know, easily jump into another one. And they've been looking like 6-8 months and nothing. Yeah. Crickets. I mean, I know, you know, tech as a sector, it's like gotten hit particularly hard, but then people will be like, well, you know, they can be plumbers. It's like, well, it takes some time to learn how to become a plumber. And when everyone goes and becomes plumbers, the wages for plumbing is going to drop a lot. So, you know, that's one of my bugbears is like when people are constantly pushing the trades thing, saying, you know, tell all the young people to go work in trades. I was like, y'all are a bunch of boomers who just want it to be a lot cheaper for you to remodel your house because that's exactly what's going to happen if everyone rushes into these industries. You know, it's the nature of labor markets.
Yeah. Well, and then you have sticking on labor markets, like all the jobs reports over the last 2 years have been revised downward 2 months later, and very quietly. The job growth has predominantly been either part-time job growth or full-time employment that's been taken up by illegal immigrants. And then, I mean, speaking of like wage growth, we have an incredible example of an attempt to manufacture wage growth in California this week, where they instituted the $20 minimum wage for fast food workers. And he literally had overnight companies shut their doors and fire thousands of people. Mm-hmm. And the central planning, whether it be via overt policy or the data manipulation, again, going back to the exhaustion that you were mentioning earlier, I think that's another big factor in it, is like people are seeing these things in their real life, and then the government's telling you, don't believe your lying eyes. Everything's okay. It's the best market we've ever been in.
Yeah. Well, you know, it all goes back to 1971, doesn't it?
It does.
That's when we had the great divorce between productivity and wages. Used to be gains in productivity, people were compensated for. And you're not going to have, I don't think we're ever going to have like a good wage growth model until we go back to, until either like Bitcoin becomes dominant enough for people to be paid in Bitcoin, which would be awesome. Or just like some kind of strict, either like Taylor rule at the Fed, or, you know, go back to some kind of standard. I like the lead standard.
The lead standard?
Yeah.
An economy backed by bullets?
Yes. And butter. I want giant vaults at Fort Knox. We're going to like stock them with 5.56 rounds and then really fine butter.
That has been one of the positive externalities of all this economic pressure. At least in my life. I obviously can't speak for everybody, but my wife has noticed it at the grocery store. She's like, fuck, like the good butter, the good bread, it's way more expensive, or you're getting less. So she's decided, I'm going to make my own butter, make my own bread. That's been something that's been happening in our house over the course of the last year. It's been incredible. Makes her own pasta as well.
Yeah, that's what it took for me to double down and just start like buying whole cows, whole hogs, all that. And that's been great, actually. So there is this trend of like millennials suddenly connecting with the silent generation in terms of lifestyle. That is, it's interesting to watch, and that's like the best case outcome. You know, like that's the healthy way to adapt to these kind of pressures. The problem is when, you know, people take these pressures and like just give up hope, you know, and start on drugs or drinking heavy or whatever, you know, all number of vices that are coping mechanisms for all this. And, or just suicide. And like the suicide rates are nuts.
The assisted suicide rates are nuts too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're killing the autistics in Canada now.
Yeah.
I
think I saw someone, what was it, 28-year-old in Sweden was getting assisted suicided last week. Which is crazy. Like,
some of the more publicized cases, I feel like they're doing it for attention.
Yeah. Well, even it's like, I don't know, it's very perplexing. As somebody, as a father with 2 young children, I look out the world, I'm like, holy fuck, what are you two going to grow up in? And
the Canadian government is saying that we can't afford to not do MAID program.
Yeah.
Like they're now talking about it in fiscal terms.
And it's getting to material levels. I think it was like 5% of deaths in Canada last year were MAID.
Wow. Do you know how they're doing it?
No, I think an injection.
Injection.
Multiple injections, one to numb and one to kill.
That's wild because like the pharmaceutical companies now won't sell it to states for execution purposes. But I assume the same manufacturers are like selling it to these governments for assisted suicide.
Yeah.
It's it's like they take the great moral stand against like executing someone who, I don't know, killed a young couple and burned their bodies. And but it's fine to do this for like, I don't know, kids who are molested and have mental health issues because of it.
Yeah.
It's
how much do you think a lot of this is driven? I mean, we've been focused on the economic and the political of it, but how much of the despair and the exhaustion and overall stress that we see is driven by a lack of spirituality or connection to God?
You know, I think that's a big part of it. And I think there has been a turning in all of this. Like like the new atheism of, you know, past 20 years or so, like that's gone. You know, people are searching, so I'd put it. And, you know, I think because that foundation didn't exist, there's a lot of people who, you know, got especially buffeted hard by those times, but also like the church is being shut down during the pandemic. I think that made things, you know, worse than it needed to be. People's connections to God and to each other. But, you know, I think the other part of the malaise is just like, it's such an open clown show. You know, it's like everyone, you just see the fakeness, right? Like the fake president, right? Who is supposedly declaring Easter like a trans day of visibility. He has no idea what's going on.
No.
It's like, that is not that man. That's some like staffer, you know, who didn't even know. My theory is like, they just didn't know when Easter was. Like they're just, you know, out to lunch on that. And then they just doubled down after they were called on it. And then the order went out for the rest. Okay, light up the Empire State Building, the trans flag colors tonight. You know, we've got another thing. I mean, it's like, I don't give them much credit for having like a big overarching plan. I've met too many of them. I had a weird run-in / conversation with Anthony Blinken not that long after the Ukraine invasion started. And, you know, before I thought on like television that that was an act, the way he would talk, you know, I was like, he can't really be that much of an idiot and be Secretary of State, right? And no, I talked to him and it's like, wow, this guy really is this stupid.
How did you?
And that's scarier.
What was your chance in? I don't know if it's scary. It actually gives me hope because I think the idea of this like this big plan that is being executed makes people feel hopeless. But because that's the thing, I don't know if you remember I think it was Academy of Ideas video that became very popular in COVID is like about mass psychosis, mass hysteria, whatever you want to call it. And he had a follow up to that, which I thought has actually been very influential in how I approach what we're doing here on the show and in my writing, which is you literally have to ridicule these people, highlight to others out there that they're literally fucking stupid. And once you have this knowledge that there's not some grand plan, that there's a bunch of idiots in control, like you can begin to highlight the fact that they're abject idiots and then some way, some form, get back, control yourself.
Well, I think the issue is like when that's the cut of the people that are running the show, but they keep running the show, right? It's kind of like I deserve better enemies. Like, right. Or like God give me better enemies.
They're not
like,
sending their best.
It's like, is it better to be targeted by like a Jack the Ripper type serial killer and killed that way, or just like some like random crackhead just like stabs you with a bottle and you bleed out on a subway platform? Like, I don't know. I think it's like if you're up against something that's like a conscious plan or something, at least it's sexier.
Yeah. More of a hero's journey.
Yeah, more of a hero's journey. It's just, it's not like meaningless random violence.
That's
right?
a good point.
Like random stupidity, just like people lashing out. It's like, what if there is no one behind Biden though? Like what if he actually is giving the orders, but just in an advanced demented state? Like that's pretty
See America's Caligula.
heavy stuff. Yeah. You know, I thought that was going to be Senator Fetterman.
That stroke was the best thing that ever happened to us.
Yeah. It's like, how do we replicate this? You know, it's like he took the Trump vaccine.
That's the other thing too. I mean, everybody thinks Trump's like going to be the savior in all this. Many people forget that Operation Warp Speed.
I think the biggest risk is that, you know, term 2 would just be like Jamie Dimon as Treasury Secretary and, you know, just like a staffing of like a collection of, you know, some of the most entrenched elites in power.
I mean, term 1 proved that.
Yeah.
That's what would happen. Maybe it's not, it was Steve Mnuchin, but on the war side of things, like he surrounded himself with pretty terrible people.
Yeah. I could kind of see it early on because it was like, well, you know, there's a lot of fear that he's like day one, he's going to like start pressing the nuclear launch button. But as there was turnover, it's like they were just getting replaced with other bad people. And it wasn't until the very end, like the very end of it, that almost made everything worse because it was like, this is who you could have put at Department of Defense all along, but you waited till like November 2020 to like put in Miller. You know, or these other, it was like the last couple months he just started like throwing in like the wildest people. And that's because they were the last ones who would work for him. But if they had been his staffers all along, I don't think it would have ever gotten to that point. So.
God, there's so many angles to this too. Now I want to talk about like the media's state on this. And we were talking about social media earlier, but now you have this environment where you have Tucker breaking off. There's a lot of independent publications like I Am 1776 coming to the fore. Obviously you have this fracturing of the mainstream media into these more, you have more established people defecting from mainstream, going independent. There's Tucker, Megyn Kelly, Don Lemon on the other side, Cuomo, and how much they've fed into this malaise that we've...
It's interesting to see Cuomo like off the leash, or all these personalities like off the leash. But then you just like realize that pretty much everyone who works professionally in media is a chameleon.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, it's not the on-air personalities you hate or you love. Like, you know, they're reading scripts. And I don't know. I think with the impact of Tucker's cancellation, you now have this phenomenon where like Tucker was kind of the guy who kept people on script, but he did a good job of identifying like which topics, which things to run after, like how to herd the cats. And without that monologue every night, I think there's just now a lot more weird like infighting and weird directions that things are taking.
Quick break here, freaks. This rip is brought to you by Gradually Then Suddenly, a framework for understanding Bitcoin as money by Parker Lewis. I wrote the foreword to the book. I'm honored to have done so because it's the best 0-to-1 primer if you're looking for a logical explanation of why Bitcoin obsoletes all other money. Buy one for yourself and maybe a few for your friends. Go to thesafehouse.com/gradually. That's thesafehouse.com, safe spelled SAIF, thesafehouse.com/gradually. Use the promo code TFTC for $5 off at checkout. Buy it now, freaks. The price of Bitcoin is going up. You need to understand it. This is the best 0-to-1 primer. Back to the show.
I don't know. I think a lot of people are trying to be Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
Too. And that's becoming a problem because you have like, I don't know, Charlie Kirk, who's running the biggest right-wing youth organization, suddenly just getting up and being like, 30-year women are not in their prime.
I hate the whole manosphere.
It's they all need to be taken out back. And,
well, a lot of them are, I mean, a lot of people, it's all a bunch of hypocrites who, number one, don't practice what they preach. I don't think they believe all of it. Again, it's just,
a lot of people who aren't in their own prime either. They've hit the wall, and now they're
exactly. I mean,
well, it's very online and ahistorical too, because like people are thinking, when people are talking like the phenomenon of a spinster is without precedent, or the guy who just like doesn't get married,
or the wine aunt.
Yeah, or this or that. It's like these archetypes of, they go back thousands of years. There's always a percentage of them in any society. And it used to be that people just had the good taste to like not try to be unnecessarily cruel. Like a lot of it, talking about like, these women who aren't married. It's like, a lot of these women, they're not married because no guy has asked them. It's not through like any fault of their own. And I don't know, somehow like just making that a thing is just for people to talk about in public. To me, it's just kind of, it's very low class behavior.
It is. And it's creating this weird, I mean, I don't know if it's indicative of a broader trend, but I've seen like Reddit posts from women who've been happily married for years, and they're like, my husband started watching Andrew Tate, or name your other Manosphere influencer, and now he thinks that he has the right to just have sex with whoever he wants, and his place on earth is just go forth and spread his seed, and he doesn't need to be monogamous. Like, that's just one example of the corruption. Then you have this whole...
Well, his brother put out this video talking, it was basically like a coaching guide, like this is how to convince girls to give you their virginity. But then on the flip side of it, it's like, well, I want my wife to be a virgin. That's the other thing. It's like they're like promoting like this one lifestyle on the other hand, but then they're just saying, but for me, I mean, for my wife, then like, she needs to be like untouched. And it's this, complete like hypocrisy and schizophrenia. And it's like, why is this even like up for discussion?
Yeah.
Like, why are people actually interested in this?
The impressions and the views and the attention it gets would suggest that
they used to say that the war of the sexes would be impossible to fight because there would be too much fraternization with the enemy. But now I kind of worry that that's not the case anymore. Like, people really do buy into these to some of these like group like paintings of a group, right? Like these ultra stereotypes and caricatures, like all women are this way, or like all men are this way, or men need to do this, men need to do that. And it's like 99% of the time they're like talking about one specific person in their personal life. One woman who did this thing to them, or maybe two, and then like amplify it as like, this is a critique of billions of people.
Yeah.
I still see people as individuals that very often resist categorization and pigeonholing, and it's a lot more. I think it's a lot more fun to get to know people on individual levels and judge people on individual levels. All of that kind of. At the end of the day, I come back to being a liberal, like classic MLK. Content of character, all that stuff. It's because that's. You lose things when you take something as complicated as a human being and you narrow it down to like M or F or R or D or any of these things. Like people are
Bitcoiner. Like that's why like earlier I was trying to be particularly lack of a better term. Like I don't want to paint everybody who's into Bitcoin as a regimented subgroup that believes all the same things. Certainly not the truth.
We could say a person of Bitcoin.
Yeah, person of Bitcoin. The people of Bitcoin.
It's like the whole rise of identity politics on the left. That was what drove me to like, what would be defined as the right. Yeah. And so like a right-wing version of that's not what I'm after. you know, and if that makes me just like a dinosaur, then that's fine.
Well, no, and you think, again, I even hate like if people would call me, I am conservative. I got married at 25. I have children. We go to church. Like trying to conserve traditions that we grew up with. And yeah, I'm conservative, but I even hate that label. Like I said, very much in line with viewing everybody as an individual, getting to know them.
I think something that drives a lot of that, though, is a lot of the people who are like promoting the discourse, occurs to me, they are themselves very deracinated, and they don't have, I think, strong identities. And I think that's why they're kind of like grasping towards that, right? Like a lot of the people who are the most like online kind of annoying proselytizing Christians are like themselves recent converts, right? And they're like the ones saying that, well, you know, all Protestants are going to hell. And it's like they just became a Catholic last year.
Yeah.
And, you know, like cradle Catholics, like they don't talk that way.
No.
So
I mean, that's me. Like, so I grew up Catholic, I'm still a Catholic, but it's maybe blasphemous to any of the new age Catholics out there, where we've been going to an Episcopalian church just because it's convenient for us. It's down the street. They say the Nicene Creed. They don't believe in transubstantiation, which I still have a little bit of a problem with, but it's the community that we've grown up with in our neighborhood, who our boys hang out with. That's where they go to church. And it's convenient for us. There's not that many Catholic churches here in Austin, Texas.
My dad once described to me like the Episcopals are like Catholics without as many of the bells and whistles. Yeah, and it is like across the spectrum, but it you know, that is an example. But then you have like other people who like they'll be like Catholic converts to like they'll become evangelical or something, and then it's like it's the opposite phenomenon. They'll then suddenly be like freaking out on the other Catholics, or you know, they're like their family members that didn't do the conversion process with them. I guess some of that's like a natural thing, but with this other stuff too, like I don't know, like American nationalist identities and some of these things, like not having a strong regional identity, but see like a certain brand of person, like they're really into the idea of America, but there's not like a particular place or region within it, and then you find out that they're tweeting from Malaysia. It's like, oh, okay, maybe that's why.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. If somebody was born in Philadelphia, we moved to South Carolina, Charleston, for 4 years when I was growing up. Went to college in Chicago, live in New York, now live in Texas. Like, there are these distinct cultures. There may be quote unquote American culture that anchors back to just like the idea of what the founding fathers fought for, but beyond that, like there are these subcultures that are beautiful and necessary, and probably necessary to have a strong society overall at the end of the day.
Yeah, I see identity as being kind of like this nesting doll thing, right? So just in like the context of national and regional, all that, it's like, you know, American, Virginian, and like start boiling it down to, you know, I'm from this town. In
Philadelphia, I'm from this parish.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, places like Philadelphia, Boston, all these cities like have very strong city identities. And that's a very classic thing, you know, Athenians versus Spartans and all this, like that's, and in a lot of ways, that's like a lot more natural and better fitting than to try to have like a national identity. You know, I think something that's kind of missed when people talk about like nationalist movements and early 20th century, whether it be Germany or France or wherever, was that a lot of these were left-wing in a sense of like having this homogenizing culture war type flavor, right? Of creating like a German people, which was actually a new invention in many ways, because before that, well, you had Swabians, you had Bavarians, Saxons, right? All of these like very distinct peoples and cultures, and you know, try to mash them up into one, you know, homogenized blend. An example of that too is in France during the last election, like this right before the election, Marine Le Pen said that she was against the teaching of the Breton language in the schools in Brittany. Because it was a regional language, it wasn't French, but it's older than France. And that's the example I use is like nationalists are not always your friends, because they'll ask you a lot of times to give up all of these like real particular things that I think at these lower levels of, attachment, like to particular places or regions or whatever, like that's what, the big national stuff, like that's the broad outline. But what really gives color to it all is like these really particular attachments people have. And yeah, I think there's a generation out there that's like looking, and they've been stripped of those, right? Because of this ongoing cultural revolution. They've been stripped of those. And so now they're out searching, trying to, grasp onto these things. But unfortunately, enough of them are being annoying in the process that it's creating a lot of noise.
What do you mean by that?
Well, just like what we were talking about with like, I don't know, Manosphere type of stuff and this and that. It's just like people are just like groping around in the dark for answers and bumping into people, and things are kind of messy.
Yeah, and that's a product of the weird inflection point we find ourselves in. Humanity finds itself in with this transition to the digital age. Like we have these digital spaces where people who are geographically distributed across the world can meet and think they, not think, but in some cases, definitely, like it's how I found everybody comes on this podcast I met on the internet. Most people I found on this podcast I met on the internet, but we're in this weird inflection point where people are over-indexing on the digital, forgetting the physical sort of connection you need in your everyday life and meet space.
Yeah. For me, like within this sphere, for a long time, I just, didn't hardly meet anyone offline. From it, I just kind of kept all that segmented. But then, going to coming to places like Austin, coming here, all this, it's great because when you're actually able to be in a room with someone, whatever, like it's so much richer than just
it really is
the content that's out there. And I think one of the most valuable things you can take away from all of this is just like the connections like that. Like what if the real MAGA was the friends we made along the way?
Well, it's funny. I had this internal struggle where I would not be sitting in this chair, I would not have the life and the career that I have today without the connections I made online in the Bitcoin space, and now broadly branching out to other tangential areas, if you will. Moved my family to Austin, Texas. Most of my family, my wife's family, big Irish Catholic families, are in Philadelphia, and it's this weird struggle I go through where I feel very compelled to work on what I'm working on and be around physically the people that I'm working with. But then family is the most important thing. This is like this, I don't know if I'm articulating this appropriately, but the distance, being physically disconnected from my family while working on something passionately here is something that I struggle with.
Yeah, it's a very American struggle.
Yeah.
I'm reading especially for like Californians, because they're like, for those of us from the East Coast, like our families stopped when they got to a certain point. Californians, it was just generations. They continued across, and so you have like the most restless breed of Americans. And without modern air travel or any of this stuff, so many people, like that's a kind of a core part of the American identity, though, is this like just being willing to uproot and go, and put new roots down. But yeah, totally get it. And I think it became a much bigger thing though after World War II, right? Because most people, even with the settlers and all of that, once they put down roots, they created families. They stayed somewhat in the in the same areas. After World War II, we had like this new paradigm of labor mobility. People moving across the country for aerospace jobs, Cold War industries, all this stuff. And there's a really interesting essay written by Joan Didion called Slouching Towards Bethlehem, where she had pinned a lot of the late 60s cultural foment on just how like novel and artificial it was to move away from your extended family and like raise your kids in a subdivision. And it was such a new thing that like the parents had just like kind of done the same thing their parents had done, but without like the extended family being around. That ended up being a very different experience for the kids, right? Like, having grandma and grandpa next door, like that was kind of like that made one model of parenting work. And as those parents though went and, tried to do the same thing, but without that extended family presence, it just led to, a generation that had a lot of runaways. Kids would just run off to San Francisco and be preyed upon by pimps and drug dealers and all this sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's something that I think each successive generation since has like gotten a little better at dealing with. Mm-hmm. I think the rise of affordable air travel has probably just like made it much, much better. But now, I hear of this thing, not in my own family, thank God, but among others, to where people talk about like their parents just not being that interested in seeing the grandkids. And this is like totally unimaginable. Of course, my roots are kind of similar. It's like Scots Irish and then Irish Catholic and then some English. So, I come from like a big rambunctious family where family is everything. Like, for Scots, Irish and Irish, it's like, it's the extended clan. Like that's who you're loyal to. You're not loyal to a country. You're not loyal to any of these things. You're loyal to the family. And, hearing now about how, there's some like older Americans who are just less connected, that really scares me.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly my family. Like I have 25 cousins. We're all like brothers and sisters. Like we leave Austin. Since we moved here, we've left Austin in the summer and gone to the shore where we all my whole extended family congregates on a small barrier island, and we throw the kids in the middle of the circle. There's probably an 80-person circle around the kids, and you have grandparents, my generation, our kids, like all intermingling together. And it's very important, particularly for the kids, to see us interacting with our parents and how it really does take a village. I mean, I think what we have is very special and something I desperately want to protect. And I think other people should strive for, but it takes the whole concept of it takes a village and really makes it very apparent in the physical world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's another thing too, of like the more recent like decline in the conditions of the cities that's so bad is like the large families within the cities. I mean, that's such a cultural pillar. That making a lot of these cities like Philadelphia, making it harder for people to thrive there. It's like they're kind of replacing the population to a large extent.
They don't even say Mass in English where I grew up anymore.
Wow. It's
in Portuguese and Korean.
For Brazilian, or are there Portuguese moving there?
Brazilian.
Korean, wow. It's
that's what, like, you mentioned the Philadelphia's very interesting. So I grew up in Northeast Philly, so not too far from where you see all the people doing trank under the Frankfurt L. The interesting is, like, Frankfurt L has always been that way. It's always been like, when I grew up, my parents were like, don't ride your bike past Kensington Ave towards Frankfurt, the Frankfurt L. But no, it has devolved to a certain extent, particularly on the outskirts. But I don't know, Philly's, I consider it the Shire. It does have these strong pillars that I don't think will ever crumble. South Philly.
Philly has always been like fascinating to me because you can have something like Boathouse Row on the Schuylkill, and then where I used to go to race in college at the Dadvale Regatta.
Yep.
Still held on a Saturday to respect his beliefs that you shouldn't exercise on Sundays. Really cool event. Largest collegiate rowing competition in the country. But at the same time, like just a few miles away, staying in a hotel that had a bulletproof concierge. That's like a bunch of prostitutes standing outside.
Yeah.
That the person who did logistics for our rowing team, they fell for the fake reviews that the Indian cousins had left. just like, this is such a cheap motel. And it has a 5-star rating.
Well, it's because I went to high school right not too far from Boathouse Row in North Philly. And that is like, because you get Fairmount, you get Girard Ave, and you get towards North Philly, like towards Temple. And that was I went to an all guys prep school, and we were like in the middle of North Philly, where like you had lockdowns for like stray bullets that were being flung around the neighborhood where we went to high school. But you could easily walk like to Boathouse Row from high school. So you have this like juxtaposition of the chaos and the beauty of what was built in the previous centuries.
Yeah. It's really something. I mean, you get these glimpses of what it was like kind of before. I see this in Brazil a lot, like in Rio. There's beautiful colonial architecture that's crumbling. And then like modernist, brutalist architecture, like it's more recent, but it just hasn't been well maintained. And then like, by the 2010s, it's just like squalor all around that. And it felt a lot like being like the barbarians living in the ruins of Rome. It's like there's aqueducts, but no one knows how to keep them up. Mm-hmm. I don't think Philly's that far gone as Rio, but it is interesting to be in these places where, it's like a lot of old, nice architecture and things get run down. There hasn't been a major civic beautification movement in America since like 1920, like with the City Beautiful movement. And it's incredible to me how many parks and museums and just great, public works are from that period, like that 10 years of, or however long it lasts. I think it was like 1920 to when the Depression kind of put a damper on that sort of thing. But so much of like what we identify as like, this is what makes this city a nice place to live or to visit or wherever, was just like built during this one
decade.
Yeah. Like this outpouring of like, civic reform and beautification. And, when like the Mackenzie Bezos of that era, like was not giving the money just to these, communist nonprofits when they were actually like spending it to build like a park in a city or museums or sculptures or whatever else. Speaking of, and it kind of relates back around to Bitcoin though, Nashville, they have the what do they call it? It's the Big Greek Temple. That's right there. It's like the one in Greece, the Parthenon. Yeah, it's like a replica of the Parthenon that they decided to build like in the early 1900s, and it's a huge statue in it. I think it's Athena. But, you go there and it's amazing. It's like kind of in the middle of the city, massive grassy area, and then this huge Greek temple that's in better shape than the one in Greece. Well, obviously it's not as old. But you think about it, like this is what people in a much poorer time, like Tennessee in the early 1900s was not a particularly wealthy place. And it's like, how is it that, we're on paper so much more prosperous now, but nothing like this is happening project wise? Like there's so few people with vision to just do anything, or the vision and the means. I think that's why, like, Elon has such a big fan base, you know, because it's like there's at least one guy who's still trying to do like these wild projects and doing things like you know, manufacturing instead of just software. You know, but you know, I see some of our guys up and coming, like the Daylight Computer.
Yeah, the Ajin. That
Not fully the Parthenon, but you can take that thing to the Parthenon and just like, you know, work from the grass as, you know, people walk around the park.
Well, that, and then like on the engineering, like the architecture side, like shout out to Chuck Marone at Strong Towns and Austin Tennell, Building Culture and 1,000-Year Homes. Like there is bright spots. Yeah. Like Strong Towns, I think it's probably one of the most profound books I've read in the last decade, just because it was like, holy shit, I've never thought of like the economics of a city this way. Like the focus that he has on revenue per square foot and how you should try to design a city physically to produce an economic outcome is like one of the biggest unlocks I've had in recent memory. And that's the thing. It's like, but Chuck Marone, he's not Mackenzie Bezos. He doesn't have the will. He can give towns like the playbook of like, if you really care about the economic well-being and the aesthetic nature of your city, here's what you can do. But you got to invest in, for a lot of these smaller towns that want to become strong towns, it's a massive time investment. They don't simply have the capital to throw at it. It takes time and vision and patience.
Yeah. You know, there are these like, I see them almost as monasteries. Like there's this school down in Charleston where they still teach the classic building trades, like the artisanal style. And I love that it's there because I think Charleston has the best urban architecture anywhere in the country by far. No one comes close to it. It's like one of the only cities that I recommend for foreigners to bother traveling to.
Yeah, I feel lucky to have lived there for as long as I did.
Yeah. Amazing place.
Speaking of Scots Irish, that's where what happened. Was like my family started in Mississippi and then half broke off to Charleston, half broke up to Philly.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of Charleston was built by like the Huguenots. This was one good thing that came from persecuting the Protestants, is they sent a lot of them to South Carolina and they were really good builders. But yeah, you have like places like that. They're keeping this technology alive, and like hopefully, you know, some of the elites will start to grab onto it, and you can have like another big version of like the City Beautiful movement. But
that's like, I don't know. The elites these days have terrible aesthetics. Like Elon, agree what he's doing with SpaceX, Tesla, and all of his other companies, X now. I think it's ambitious, something we should be striving for, big ideas. The aesthetics are terrible. Bezos, Amazon's a great company. He ditches his long-term wife for some cosmetically manufactured side piece.
Yeah, it's
Bill Gates, like all these people, they don't have good aesthetics, which is disconcerting to say the least.
That's one you can mark in favor of Trump is he still has the everyman's taste. He's one of the only billionaires who has like the courage to have a beautiful wife. And it does take courage to have a beautiful wife as a billionaire. They all seem to be like allergic to it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why we have to have new elites. That's why the people in this Bitcoin office need to, you know, make a ton of money.
Yeah. That's what we actually just had last month, an event, Bitcoin Urbanism, where we had Austin Tennell from Building Culture come in, Meester let in. That was to give a great presentation saying like, if Bitcoin keeps tracking on its route to full monetization as it has up to this point, like, right, I think he said right now, Bitcoiners make up 1% of high net worth individuals. If it does another 10x, we'll make up 10%, so on and so forth. And at some point, we'll find that Bitcoiners are the majority of the high net worth individuals. And
what is the proper aesthetic for Bitcoin, though?
I don't.
It'd be mid-century mod, or I kind of feel like Art Deco.
No, not Art Deco. I mean, I'm partial towards like the I'm terrible at like the labeling of these different architectural periods, but like I love the old stone houses in Philadelphia, like in Chestnut Hill, like by Boathouse Row, like that aesthetic for that environment is what aligns with me. Then you get to South Carolina, like the colonial, big, tall porches that wrap around. And
I do want a South Carolina plantation one day with like the long row of oaks with the Spanish moss that create the.
Have you ever been to Daniel Boone Plantation?
I haven't.
Yeah, it's right in Mount Pleasant outside of Charleston. Beautiful plantation.
Mount Pleasant is great. Sullivan's Island.
Yeah.
Love those beach houses out there at Sullivan's Island.
Yeah.
Like that 1930s style of building on the coast is unparalleled.
Yeah, we lived in Mount Pleasant, and we went to church on Sullivan's Island because it was so beautiful. Yeah. Like we would take that 30-minute drive to go to church.
Yeah. Speaking of aesthetics and South Carolina, Kiowa is interesting because so much of that has been developed since the 1980s.
Yeah, it's a modern.
Yeah, but you go there and it's not like this ham-handed attempt to do like the classical architecture. To me, it feels pretty authentic and natural there. Yeah,
because you do have those. It's like the road to Kiowa. It has like literally the oaks.
Yeah.
Going over the whole road, the Spanish moss falling. It's beautiful.
Yeah, well, one of the principles they had was like remove as few trees as possible. So even like building brand new houses, they would build decks around existing trees. And so much of new development, like they just go in and clear off an entire site and then like plant, trees that'll take 7 years to mature. So I think that's a big part of it is just the, taking down as little of the mature vegetation as possible, kind of, building around the environment rather than trying to terraform the environment to just be like a flat pad for a house and yard.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what we covered at the Bitcoin Urbanism meetup. And then I recorded a podcast with Austin Tur and Kelly Lannon. After, it was like economic consequences to this suburban sprawl, where like you create a shit ton of maintenance debt that will not be able to get paid back in the long run. So you're literally going to have these suburban enclaves outside of city centers that are just, they become the slums that the poor people are pushed into eventually because they cannot be maintained economically.
Yeah, I have some brothers in construction, they do remodeling and stuff, and the suburban homes that were built in like the 2000s and 2010s, like that's what keeps them in business. Like these things are falling apart after 10, 15 years. Like you have fake stone applique for chimneys, and that starts peeling back, and you see that it's really just like it's like a chicken coop construction under there. Walls that are sprouting mushrooms because they were improperly sealed or improperly sided, or the eaves are too short and they don't shed the water far enough away to keep the walls from rotting. Substandard plywood and materials used for roofing, all this stuff. It's like it's a huge problem. We adopted the Japanese model of building houses that are meant to be torn down 30 years later, but without telling the consumer that that's what we did. And so by the time the average homeowner today, I feel like by the time they get done paying down their mortgage, unless they own an older home, if they own a new home, like by the time they're done paying it down, like the thing is pretty much ready to be replaced. Just like the grade of materials that's used, all of this, it's insane. And then you contrast that with like the big old houses you'll find in, just about any village in Western Germany that, they date back to the 1100s, the year 1000 and all this. And you think like, okay, it's expensive to build a house like that in the first place, but is it really expensive? Because this is going to be housing families for centuries. I think I would argue our mode of development right now is the most expensive. It's not just the maintenance debt, but it's that, it's like, it's just not going to be able to last with maintenance, even with really good maintenance, anywhere nearly as long as it could if it was just like properly built from the start.
Which is hilarious considering the cultural revolution that we are probably under that really pushes environmentalism and.
Oh yeah, no, but you know, like they're pushing the new, go get a new electric car, but really, the most environmentally friendly thing you could do is have an old car and repair it and have a catalytic converter on it, obviously, but. Because of the cost of extracting all of these metals to build a truck with, it's better to, if we got rid of planned obsolescence, like if that should be our response to, to the demands of the environmental groups is there are really serious environmental issues that we're facing as a country. And with a lot of the environmental movement, like the hysteria and just bad policies and things that they're promoting, a lot of it's just corruption. It's like a way to get federal funding for like various, solar startups and whatever else. It's all very much grift. The response to that should be like, no, this is the right way to do things. But I think a lot of people, they do this like kind of knee jerk, like, no, nothing is happening, or I'm going to like install the thing that causes black smoke to roll out of what do they call it? Coal burners, I think, or rolling coal. That's one of those things you'll see sometimes. People like retrofitting their pickup trucks to intentionally make them dirtier, just because it's like a middle finger to the environmentalists. Like this is This is insane. Instead of just saying, all right, we're not going to do cash for clunkers, any of this stuff, we're going to, give you a tax write-off to restore and keep like your old car running, because it takes a lot more to build a new car than it does in terms of like the environmental cost. It takes a lot more to do that, or for anything like refrigerators, freezers. My dad has a chest freezer that was a wedding gift from 1967. Yeah. And the thing has been running continuously since then. Still uses it. Still works great.
57 years. Yeah, did the math right.
Yeah,
and that's like, you can't even buy a blender without it having to buy a new one 18 months later.
Yeah. Or a washer and dryer. I just had to replace a dryer because of, not because of like any real mechanical issues, but because the motherboard on the control panel glitched out and was just like wouldn't turn the heat on. It would so when you turned it on, it would start spinning, but there would be the heater wasn't turning on to heat up the air.
And that's just a computer problem.
That's just a computer problem. But Samsung doesn't know how to fix it. It was out of warranty, so they weren't really able to tell me anything other than
go get a new one.
Go get a new one. And so I hunted around on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, and I got a really old GE top loader dryer, and I was like, I'm not touching anything digital. This thing is like totally old school analog. Working great so far, and if it breaks down, I can get in and
fix the motor,
fix it,
whatever. Yeah, it's we've had to replace our washer and our dryer down here already, which hasn't been fun. Then we almost had to replace our washer again, and it was just a water line problem. And I figured out how to fix the water line, insulate it properly. I was like, all right, we're not buying another one of these. Yeah. Yeah, fuck, man. We've covered the macro and the micro of the problems that exist in our world. What are you in terms of actionable things that you're worried about right now? What's your focus?
My focus right now is on this futurism issue, next print edition of IM 1776.
So before this
journal,
talking about this particular issue, what is IM 1776?
It is a online magazine / print journal that we cover everything from commentary on economic, social, cultural, political issues to yeah, some fun pop culture stuff, movie reviews. It's, try to be the favored magazine of dictators and mercenaries, as some journalist once said, which I take as a great compliment.
Who said that?
I don't remember who. It was one of the things I saw. There was a Guardian piece done on us recently that was just really laying it on thick. Like we ran an obituary when Ted Kaczynski died. I think that was one of the things that I included for it, which is, I don't know. There was no like explicit call to action, like, send out pipe bombs in his name. So I don't see what their problem was, but because it wasn't just like a blanket, everything this man ever said was bad. And, then there were critical parts in that, but they just use whatever they can because they're jealous that we get a lot more views in circulation than they do. I mean, it is hard to be. I think it's hard to be in the legacy media now and see like upcoming people like eat their lunch.
Well, it's not only the upcoming people; it's the fact that it's people who haven't historically or didn't go to train as a journalist. It's just people that are
people who have not gone through the authorized credentialing process and institutions and all. I mean, I've seen it before, like when I've gotten press passes to cover other things, like they just like look at you like, really? That they let you into the press bin.
They're a dying breed though, and I tried to touch on this earlier, but that's the other thing. Like people over-index the impact that these legacy media companies have. They've at some point it was warranted. They've developed this prestige over time, over the course of a century, for a lot of them, and they're just hanging on to that prestige that was built by generations before them.
Yeah, I mean they're wearing it now like a skin suit. There's great history of journalism in the 20th century. I mean, just people who found interesting things out and dug into it and all that. I think like from the 40s like up through the 80s, that was kind of a golden age of reporting there for a while. And one of the biggest things I think we've lost, and in a very negative sense when it has come to the decline involved in news media, has been local papers. Because a lot of these local papers were good at, they had investigative reporters on staff. They were very good at holding local governments to account. And now you see like almost none of that. It still exists for cities, but like in the places that they're not like big enough, to have a dedicated newspaper anymore, because people get their news from Facebook. And they'll just be like Facebook groups, and that kind of like serves the purpose of what things were previously. But of course, it's not independent and it's not vetted like a paper. It's like anyone can post in there. Which there are some benefits, but then there's other, like there's reasons that you have these like formal local newspapers that could actually fact check things before they threw out the accusations and all this. So I don't know, it's like, in some ways this is new. In some ways we're just going back to like the really old model of where newspapers in America were explicitly partisan and just like said the most crazy, like you go back to coverage of some of the early presidential races, right? And that would be talking about how, like Andrew Jackson, has syphilis and like all of this stuff. It's like National Enquirer type headlines. That was the coverage for most of the 1800s in American media. So I guess it was just kind of like a blip that we had this kind of objective local newspaper model that existed here for a while. But
yeah, fast forward to 6 years ago, and it was Trump's getting peed on by Russian strippers.
Yeah,
completely fake.
Yeah, man's too much of a germaphobe for that to ever happen. I mean, that's how you know it was fake. Like if it was the other way around, you'd be like, oh, maybe.
Yeah.
But he would not be the one getting peed on. So that's how I know it was fake.
But they leaned into it for way too long. They're still leaning into it today. I mean, like, what's going on?
They wanted it to be true.
Yeah. Because they're sick fucks.
Yeah, because they can't. It's easier to create like a caricature of your enemy that you can dismiss than it is to address like uncomfortable truths that you recognize as being true. So that's why you have to like demonize, because otherwise you just you would have to actually deal with whatever they're bringing up, which would have been like the mature thing when Trump came up would have been for the ruling class to be like, yeah, actually, you know, we have hollowed out vast parts of the country with these, like, allowing China to, you know, do these predatory trade operations, like target our furniture industry in particular with dumping. Like they subsidize their own factories to produce copies of what furniture makers in Virginia and North Carolina were doing. And you know, there were already laws on the books to prevent this sort of thing, but the Bush administration wouldn't move the litigation. And so the manufacturers themselves had to come up with like $15 million for legal fees. And, you know, they won, but they didn't win like enough for it to even make it worth their while.
It's like
and
a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, it didn't save the furniture industry. It really just meant that, you know, like that was the last of the industry's money just went to trying to fight this futile thing. Instead of like acknowledging things like that and then trying to work on them and, you know, be like, okay, yeah, let's like, we've transitioned to like this information economy. How do we bring the rest of the country along with us, right? Instead of taking that seriously, they just decided to be like, yeah, so this guy who's saying these things, he was peed on by Russian hookers in a hotel.
And all of you people that think he's coming to help you, you're racist idiots. Yeah. And again, it goes back to the quality of the enemies. They're not sending their best.
Not sending their best.
It's literally the only tactics they have are literally like grade school. Like he got peed on. Don't deal with him.
Yeah, but I guess that's like that works on their people that they need to propagandize. Maybe that's why they do the grade school stuff. Like maybe just so much of society is still
adolescent.
Still adolescent, yeah.
Yeah. But I think it is bad. I think they pushed too far with COVID. I've seen this in my own circle. I mean, coming from Philadelphia, you can imagine a lot of the people I grew up with and are related to are extremely liberal, which is the case. And I've seen just in my own personal circles, people that I never thought would like come to me and be like, yeah, I think what you've been saying is correct.
You know, for me, when that happened, it wasn't just from COVID. They stayed stubborn during COVID. It was the mugshot. The mugshot, when Trump was brought in to, I think it was Fulton County where they did it, that was like that was the big change that I saw. That was like the first moment when like people were like, actually, we do have crime in the city. It was weird because it was like they were telling me like they were sounding a lot more like me, but on these other kind of issues without even like addressing the mugshot. But I think that on some level, the mugshot was this like indicator of like, no, you know, this isn't like the big scary fascist man. Like this is like a politician that we have just like perp walked. You know, like it became evident who really controls the power, because they've always tried to like pretend that there's, you know, someone on the right is really pulling all the strings and is like trying to. You saw this during Trump's first term when they were wearing the robes from the that show, Handmaid's Tale. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's also too like when you have liberals pretend to be oppressed by Christian fundamentalism. You know, like, oh, Christian fundamentals run our government. Like that was during the Bush years. It was like that. and it's so far from the truth. I mean,
he had that Netflix propaganda documentary on the family or whatever it was. You remember
that? Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've had so many of these. I mean, these different shadowy groups, like there'll be like a Catholic fraternity like Opus Dei. And it sounds, you look at some of the writing in the media about it, and I mean, it sounds like they're Alex Jones talking about Freemasons. It's like, Anthony Scalia was like the member of this, like there's a secret Catholic organization and they're trying to like turn all women in America into baby making machines. And, it's like a men's group that like gets together of like DC professionals. They're having coffee every Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think everyone likes to, on both sides, there's just this like universal tendency to just invent a lot cooler enemies than they really have.
Maybe that's a lesson everybody needs to internalize from this conversation. The enemies are not as smart or strategic as we may think them to be.
No, they're just people. That's one of these things. I tell people. I lived in LA for a little while, and I'd run into celebrities here and there. And what had struck me at first, until it just became so much of a thing that I just took it for granted, then, is like how much of a normal people they were.
Yeah.
It's like, Ryan Gosling at the next table having brunch, and he's just like talking on his cell phone to somebody, and he sounds like just like just like an average Joe.
Yeah.
Could be anybody.
That's what I worked at Barstool Sports in New York for a quick minute, and that was a similar experience, like seeing all these pro athletes and celebrities come through the office, and they would come to the business floor and talk to people. It was just like, normal conversation.
Mm-hmm.
People are just people.
People are just people.
There are some sociopaths out there.
And there are some that are exceptional too. I mean, I met Trump once in person, and the guy is like such a charmer. It's crazy. He was asking like where I'm from, and then like a link. Oh, I own a business there. It's the best in the state. No, but just such a people person at a higher level. Some others I've met, like there've been some people. One guy, he ended up becoming the governor of Virginia. Bob McDonnell was actually prosecuted by the same prosecutor, Jack Smith, that's going after Trump now. Was prosecuted, was convicted, and then the Supreme Court overturned it unanimously. It was a political hit job because that guy was going to run against Obama in the second term. But he could remember people's names at insane levels. I was pretty much a kid when I first met him, and I didn't see him again until like 5 years later when he was running for governor. And he had he remembered my name, my mom's name, knew where we were from. We were like 3 hours away from the place where he met us. It was crazy to see someone operate like that. And then I ended up working on his campaign when he did run, and he was like that all over the place. Someone who just had this insane like gift. But at the end of the day, it was a normal guy aside from that. So even extraordinary people are still pretty normal. Yeah.
That's a talent I do not have. I'm terrible with names. Great with faces, terrible with names.
Same here. Yeah. Can't forget a face, can't remember a name.
That's something that's plagued me. And it's genetic too, because it was his worst trait as well. You can't remember anybody's name.
Well, you got it honest.
Yeah. It's something I'm working on. That's why you need to have a good wife. You need to, if you can't remember names, you need to find a wife that can remember names so she can whisper in your ear right before you walk up to somebody.
It's like in The Veep. Have you seen that show?
Yeah.
She's always got that assistant in her ear, like.
I only remember him the hell was his name in Arrested Development?
Oh, Buster.
Buster.
Yeah.
Even MVP's Buster to me. It's just like...
He plays the same character and everything. It works.
Yeah. That is fucking awesome. I threw this out to you, what, yesterday?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been
or Sunday?
Great. Yeah, I think Sunday. So Austin is great.
Yeah. I'm like...
It's cool to... I came down here like for the Eclipse, and then everyone's in town. And then, you know, we made this happen. This wasn't on the calendar anywhere near. You know, I'd already been here almost a week before then, so it's cool that there's such a concentration of high quality people in one city. You don't see that much.
Yeah, no, it is there's something special happening here. What we have going on our Bitcoin here in Pleb Lab, around the corner, a huge health focused community, many different people focus on different areas of it.
I feel like there's a wellness center on every corner.
Yeah.
I went to the Daylight Computer. They had their launches, like two totally different ones, but they were each cool in their own way. It was like you get this like co-working space / gym / cold plunge / sauna. Different kind of tech launch. You know, I'm not used to like raw milk being in coolers. It's like this is good. This is a good alignment. Yeah, and then there's like other places. There's so many cool places. Yeah. Like there's
the comedians. Literally, Rogan's mothership's 2 blocks away from here.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to.
I went to this Palladium book club discussion thing on Sunday, and as we were leaving, the organizer Andrew, he was like, "Yeah, this is where Elon decided to buy Twitter." Like the restaurant we were at for lunch. I was like, wow.
Yeah, the food scene's good here. The health scene. That's what's great. Like having lived outside of South Carolina, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, especially, you're not getting outside that much outside of spring and summer. In Chicago, you're not getting outside unless it's the summer. So being able, particularly with young kids, to get outside like in February and have it be 75 degrees, it's fucking incredible.
Yeah. And you've got country music too.
Country music.
It's very important.
It is. Yeah.
My old neighbor moved down here to play steel guitar.
Oh, really?
Doing really well with it, yeah.
Yeah,
plays at Jenny's Little Longhorn Saloon, chicken shit bingo. That's the thing is, you know, you got to keep this city weird. This is,
we've got
what makes it special.
We don't live too far from the Broken Spoke, and so we'll go there.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Terribly line dance, but the
first honky tonk I ever darkened the door of.
Yeah, the
George Strait played there back in the day.
Yeah, there will be like some big. I think Zach Bryan came and played there last year at some point. That's one thing that I don't nearly get out. That was the great thing about Chicago. The weather and the political policies weren't the best, but the blues music was incredible.
Austin, in some ways, set me on my sort of like weird political journey.
Why do you say that?
I was like I was something of a normie, believe it or not.
It's very hard to believe.
Back in the day, you know, like kind of libertarian, kind of liberal, kind of conservative, just like a standard. But I was listening to Tim Ferriss, and he had Liz Lambert as a guest on, and she started a hospitality group here in Austin. Started with the old motel. I think it was like the Continental or something, but it was down off South Congress, like back in the 90s when it was really rough over there. She like renovated this motel, did a documentary of like the last days of it being in operation as it was, which was like a drugged in place of where like prostitutes and all these other people would congregate and live. But she started talking about like her design philosophy, and that turned me on to the work of Christopher Alexander with a pattern language and the timeless way of building. And so that clicked with me. So I got into like the like good urbanism design, that kind of thing, like Wrath of Non. Mm-hmm. And then that led me down like the rabbit hole. So it's like this, I'm pretty sure she's a Democrat. You know, it's just like spunky lesbian from Texas started me down this dark path to right-wing extremism.
It's funny how the world works.
It's the butterfly effect.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny, like how the Lamberts of the world can recognize something like urban design. Not recognize it. It takes like a certain will and a certain economic system to make that possible.
Yeah, it was like it was also a matter of timing too. I think because I think the boutique hotel offerings, like in that period, like they weren't really thinking in the deep terms that she was about. Like she would, be like, okay, I want this hotel needs to have like the smell of Palo Santo in the gardens and creating like a multi-sensorial experience for guests. Like that was like light years ahead of where hoteliers were at the time. At least, in the States generally. And she's her doing that, like it's been broadly influential, I think, across a lot of the industry since then. Like, because now you'll see people. I'm trying to think. There's this hotel in Santa Monica. Like they have a pattern language like prominently displayed in the lobby, and they're doing the same thing. Like, but there's a lot of people I think who copied what Lambert and Bunkhouse Group did. Ran with it in some ways, maybe even cooler than what she had done. But yeah, just like the force of will. I mean, it takes a force of will to go in and try to make a nice hotel out of a place that was like a monthly motel for drug addicts. Like that's a certain like Texas countercultural attitude there. But you run into all types down in Texas. There's this boutique out in Dripping Springs that I stopped by when I was out near there on a ranch hog hunting, and I was trying to locate a good belt buckle to fit in. It was successful. Got a really nice one with a longhorn on it. But I started talking to the owner, and at first, and she mentioned moving from or originally being from Connecticut, and like. I clocked her as like, okay, these are one of these northern liberals that are moving down and turning Texas into such and such. I talked to her a little more, and she starts going off on the FBI. Turns out she's a constitutional lawyer, like hardcore gun nut. And it's just, you would have never, and she even, I think she even had like the purple highlights and stuff. It was like, she was such like at first, like, to me, like looked like a caricature of just like a northern liberal. And then, talking to her a little bit, she's like completely based.
They're never taking our guns. That was the one thing. I mean, I moved down here 3 years ago now. At this point, that was like when everybody's fucking flooding to Texas from New York and California. That was like the big worry. Like I'd tell people I came from New York and like, don't fuck up the city too. And
Beto O'Rourke would be senator now if it wasn't for the out-of-staters. He won the native Texan vote by a few points. The native Texans hate Cruz, probably for good reasons.
But I don't see how even if you hate Cruz, I don't see how anybody could.
No, I don't see how you can vote for it. But it was like the day was saved by the Californians. Because for all the complaints about the Californians moving in and changing things, but like Californians understand what the stakes are because they've just lived through it. And most of the people when people are complaining about Californians, what they really mean is like Midwesterners who lived in California for a few years.
Really?
Yeah. The native Californians themselves, they by and large don't leave the state in very high numbers, and when they do, it's because they're like hardcore conservatives and like they don't want their kids to get any vaccines or go to any school. So like go to Texas or Oklahoma or something. And they're usually like grandkids of the Dust Bowl migrants. So it's kind of just like returning to Texas.
Yeah.
Or Oklahoma or Arkansas. But I mean, culturally, a lot of California is really similar to Texas because there were so many Texans and Oklahomans that came there during the Depression to pick cotton, including some of my family. that, yeah, it's like very strong Texas feel there. You know, it's like Mariposa County and the foothills of the Sierras and Central Valley and all that.
Yeah. It's a shame what's happening to that great state.
Yeah. It's, we're going to take it back.
We are? What's the plan?
We're going to take it back. Well, the plan starts with the water cycle. Like California's out of drought now. So I have this theory that California's fortunes rise and fall with the rain. And so California's on a 35-year water cycle. Doesn't deviate that much from it. John Steinbeck described it really beautifully. I think it was in the opening to East of Eden. But, you know, you get like 10 really good years, 10 kind of middle years, and then like 10 really rough years. And he said the one thing that's true is that no one remembers the good years during the bad years, and no one remembers the bad years during the good years. But my theory is because this water cycle, like you can graze a lot more cattle, grow a lot more crops, that sort of thing, once you're in the good part of the cycle. And that changes the balance of power in the state, relative, rural, and urban. And so like the years when the ranchers are doing well, that tends to be, and I've looked at this kind of through the political history, that tends to be when you have like these kind of reactionary renaissances. And then, you know, in the hard years when things dry up, it's like the people out in the rural areas, they don't have as much power because they don't have as much money.
Yeah.
And, you know, the balance of power just kind of swings back and forth a little bit. It's there's a little esoteric mysticism to this, but
I didn't realize
I'm manifesting it.
I didn't realize they had a water cycle. That was
yeah. It's you know, now like there's, well, before last spring, people were talking as if like the drought was just going to end everything, and you know the whole state was in drought. Everything was like state of emergency. There's no water that you can turn on. Like farmers were just not able to plant near as much. It was causing really serious headaches, and it was getting to the point where there's concern that there might not be enough water for the cities. And like the Colorado River, for instance, that it's incredibly dry, so it's not like you could even bring it in from neighboring states. Just all across the West, huge drought problem. And since then, though, like starting in the last spring, it's just been like torrential rains. It rains later into the year. There's a lot more snowpack. Mm-hmm. It's like here a month or so ago, I think Tahoe got like 12 feet. You know, like the thing that they used to measure the snow got buried. So just unprecedented levels. And that snowpack is what, you know, keeps the lakes fed all summer and all. So that was last spring, and they were saying, okay, well, this was like a one-off. This might save California for 10 years. And then this winter, the same thing starts happening all over again. And they had these atmospheric rivers, that's what they call them, the Pineapple Express, from like in the vicinity of Hawaii. And it was like, if you look at it on what was happening on a weather map, it was literally like there was a river running in the atmosphere from way out in the Pacific directly into California. So large parts of the national park at Death Valley are inaccessible because the roads got washed out. A lot of it is there's like a big lake out there, like what was the driest desert, the lowest spot in North America. Actually, maybe in the world. I don't know. Is Death Valley the lowest in the world?
Might be.
It's either there or the Dead Sea, but it's pretty close. Totally like filled up with water. I mean, remember last year, Burning Man.
Yeah.
Right? Burning Man got rained out in August.
Yeah. Got burned out.
In like Nevada.
It was spreading. So. Ebola was spreading.
That was the best rumor.
Diplo,
so good.
Diplo was bringing Ebola back to the masses.
Valley number 8.
Number 8. Death Valley is the 8th lowest.
Eighth lowest. So lowest in America then. But, America's the country that counts. It's our world, like.
It can be. I'm worried, Ben.
Yeah.
About that. I'm looking out. I'm worried that this anarcho tyranny is going to take over. But maybe I worry too much.
I mean, things can always get worse on the bright side, but you know, things get worse until they stop getting worse. And I think we're at a point where I think we're kind of hitting critical mass. But it's just like there's a number of things that I think have to go, you know, either I would say in our direction, but it's not even so much as like things have to come in our direction. It's just like we need to not make unforced errors.
Yeah.
And
I was being a bit facetious. I'm actually very optimistic, particularly because I think, actually it's funny. The guy I was talking to when I went to grab you at the front door, it's what we were talking about all for the last couple hours before you showed up, was this intersection of the Bitcoin mining world and the energy sector. I don't think people understand how profound it is, because it's probably one of the weakest layers of our economy right now is the energy infrastructure, how fragile it is, how uneconomical it was made via the renewable energy credits. Like Bitcoin mining is breathing very strong life back into the energy sector, and the energy companies are beginning to realize this. And I think in terms of, this is something I've been telling people in the industry who are going to start their own like policy initiatives, PACs, whatever it may be, to influence policy pertaining to Bitcoin in DC, is stop wasting all your time, money, and effort doing that, and just make sure that Bitcoin mining gets as integrated into the energy sector as much as possible, because once it becomes a critical part of their operational and business stack, there's no turning back.
Right.
Like, energy is the base of everything we do in an economy. And if you get the energy sector, and the energy sector is saying, no, you can't take Bitcoin away from us, it is allowing us, enabling us to remain profitable, not only remain profitable, but expand the infrastructure, make it more reliable and robust. There's no turning back.
Yeah. Do you use your Bitcoin miners to heat your infrared sauna?
Not yet. Not yet.
There's a free startup idea out there.
Oh, there's people working. I mean, he had that spa in Brooklyn. They're doing it with the pools at least.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's yeah, I did hear about that.
My Bitcoin miners are off grid in Appalachia, in the woods.
Nice.
Of Tennessee, on a stranded natural gas well.
I've always liked the idea of putting them down into like a coal mine, just like buying a coal mine and converting it into Bitcoin. Just like a place to do it.
There's somebody you can talk about.
Yeah.
This right outside this door.
Nice.
We're going to restore all the coal mines and all the coal power facilities in Wyoming.
Very nice.
We're going to return. We're going to spin up all the power generation that we can.
Yeah. Speaking of power, you know, there's some moves towards building some new geothermal power down in El Salvador. Really exciting stuff, like harnessing the power of the volcanoes, and mining would be like a big part of that. But I didn't realize just how critical it was for aluminum production, like aluminum smelting, that the prices be consistent. It's not so much about high or low; it's just like the instability of them, and how consistent geothermal is. It's really exciting, like how the output of the power stations that were built before in El Salvador from geothermal, they're still putting out as much as they did in the 70s. And like the costs are just so fixed. It's really incredible, you know, because like normally there's so much fluctuation. And, you know, I think there's a big opportunity there in geothermal, and also, you know, like up around like the Yellowstone Basin and other areas in the U.S. that have geothermal potential, to do like power for manufacturing in particular, where it's so predictable. You can do like long-term planning with confidence. It's a really neat thing that appeals to me, especially considering how much instability there's been in other energy markets. Price-wise, you know, we've just gone through these whiplashes, like with oil and gas.
Oil and gas. Yeah. The renewable energy credits are really fucking up energy markets, even here in Texas. Thank God for all the Bitcoin mining in West Texas. It's really helping to alleviate the negative pricing problem that all this renewable infrastructure build-out has brought to the market. But going back to geothermal in Yellowstone, one can make a very strong case that it is in the best interest of humanity overall to depressurize that caldera to make sure it doesn't explode into the supervolcano. And so you need to channel that energy, produce electricity, mine Bitcoin with it.
Have you ever seen the Hakan tweet that was saying, continue to pray towards Yellowstone, focus on the caldera. We can end it here. We can end it for all time. One of my favorite niche internet subgroups is the caldera cult. I have
not stumbled across.
It's like apocalyptic end times anarcho-primitivist. Ted Kaczynski posters who they've probably all grown up by now. I don't see as much of it as before, but it's one of those things like 2016, there was just a lot more of
focus on the calderas.
Really weird niche ideologies that are incredibly appealing, even if there would be no particular reason to, but it's like building a political movement around praying to the Yellowstone volcano to get it to blow up and destroy the
put us out of our misery.
This is how we end the Fed.
It's the caldera.
This is the caldera.
The caldera. That's all. Just focused on the calderas. Do you think we'll end the Fed in our lives?
I sure hope so.
I
think so.
I think so too.
I don't know. I think next year with the fiscal situation, this might finally be the point where something happens.
I mean,
or just nothing happens and we go another 50 years.
I don't know. I've been wrong before, but it seems if you just look at the chart of the interest expense on the debt alone, it's literally a hockey stick. It's
well, the thing that for me that
the left side of the bell curve in me is just that's not going to work.
The biggest thing for me is not even that's a big part of it, but
the unfunded side.
It's the military problem.
Yeah.
It's what the Houthis did, showing that they could defy the U.S. military and that our kinetic options sucked. We were not able to wipe them off the map. That as an indicator of the U.S. may not be able to back up. Yeah. If we can't back up control of global shipping, that's a big problem. I think when it comes to the because that's what props up the dollar is we have the military power to back it up.
Yeah.
It's not totally fiat, but it's based off of having a military that has insane force production. And the defense industry has become so bloated. I talked to Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, about this back in December. We did an interview for the site. And, just the cost of these cruise missiles that we're launching at the Houthis, that alone, the interceptor missiles in Israel, that was a big problem. Going into this was that even before October 7th, it was the periodic rocket barrages that Hamas and other groups would send into Israel. They were cheap rockets, but you had to use this $2 million piece of ammunition to bring it down. And the strategy wasn't to actually overwhelm Israel with the rockets. The strategy was just to hurt their budget. And ours by extension, because we underwrote a lot of that.
And then you consider, I had this ex-intelligence advisor on last year, Lee Slusher, and he was explaining to me what's going, the arming of Ukraine is completely depleting our ammunition base.
Yeah.
And the thought, it's not as pronounced as it was this time last year, but the saber rattling around Taiwan, and the idea that we could fight Russia and China in Ukraine and Taiwan at the same time. He was it's objectively idiotic. There's not enough ammunition. We don't have the training to fight on those terrains, and we don't have the recruitment necessary to actually get feet on the ground.
Yeah. Germany had better tanks in World War II. They had better armor on them. They could move faster. All these, in specs, they just, they blew us out of the water. But we could produce 20 times as many of them for much cheaper. than the German Tiger. And that's how we won World War II. But we don't have that kind of manufacturing capacity anymore.
What was it? Napoleon said quantity has a quality of its own.
Yeah, quantity has a quality of its own. Yeah, so that's, I mean, the argument for arming Ukraine has kind of been, well, this is how we get that manufacturing restarted. But that would require us like abandoning a lot of ideologies and going back to more meritocratic, earlier attitude in America towards business and stuff. But then at the same time, like, you can't just put everything back together again after deindustrialization, because like so many of the workers have lost the skills, like with just the human capital element.
Yeah, the competency crisis is pretty massive right now. Like we're seeing with Boeing. Is that just is everything we're seeing from Boeing, is that confirmation bias? Like, has this been going on for a while, or are these anomalies that, not anomalies, but is there a true trend of the commercial airline force completely degrading in front of our eyes?
Well, another example of this was I had started noticing a pattern of big fires and accidents at food processing plants. Mm-hmm. I put together,
I think that's why I started following
a thread. Yeah. Now, people took it and ran with it and said that like this was an proof that the World Economic Forum was planning to starve us out or something. And, you know, I mean, I was taking hits for that kind of stuff. They're like, oh, you're promoting conspiracy. I was like, I have not said why it is. I'm just pointing out, okay, this other, you know, yet another thing has happened. You know, not making any claims, but then the more I looked into it, you know, the more it became convinced, okay, this is obviously not some deliberate plot, but something's happening here. What's going on? And because that had blown up and become so prominent, some of the people who had like firsthand knowledge of what was going on actually DM'd me, tell me, hey, this is what was going on. And overwhelmingly what it was that it was COVID. Now, it wasn't the virus making the factories catch on fire, but it was the way we responded to the virus. So much of the workforce like went home during that. And basically the people who stayed and kept the lights on were doing these like superhuman heroic jobs to keep the food being processed, right? You know, keeping the lights on. But then the companies were like, oh, cool, we can actually like get this productivity output with lower labor costs. Let's go tell the investors, this is awesome. You know, profits, stocks, yay. Without taking into account that these people could not like do the heroics forever.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were baby boomers. They're already older workers. They had the knowledge of, this is how we maintain things. This is how we would do it analog if the digital goes down. You know, we had this accident back in 1985. This is how we keep it from happening again. All this, you know, core build-up knowledge. And they started burning out left and right around a year and a half into this. And so they started dropping out and the positions would be backfilled, but with people who had like no knowledge of the factory or how it ran and all of this. So then suddenly accidents started happening. It's very much like the last half of Atlas Shrugged, right? You just started getting this breakdown. Yeah, I mean, I think that novel, like more people should read it. It was a big thing. People were reading a lot around like 2010 or so during the last recession, but I think it is actually more applicable today to like the competency crisis and what's going on. Oh, you've got it right there. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's that. So it's, I don't know if it's just abject loss of knowledge in a particular spot. So like the Francis Scott Key Bridge, similar story. Nobody DM'd me directly, but a friend of mine who I trust spoke to somebody with knowledge of these shipping, these these shipping fleets and how they operate, particularly in the U.S. within a certain vicinity of the coast. And apparently there was a policy put in place that if you're within a certain amount of miles from a coast in the U.S. or a port in the U.S., you have to switch your engine to like a sulfur-based fuel. And that makes the reliability of the combustion, it reduces the reliability of the combustion. And so this source basically told my buddy, like, yeah, what happened most likely was that they switched to this sulfur fuel, and they just, like, it reduced the reliability of the engine, and it crapped out like at the absolute worst time.
Is that for like emissions?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Around, like, they don't want emissions in urban environments. They want cleaner air, something like that.
No, like, you look into big accidents, and like these end up being the things, and it's more, more insidious in a way than if it was part of the big WEF plot, right? Because it's just these like poorly thought out, it's like you said, I always know some bad news is coming when I hear there was a policy put in place. Seems to immediately precede disaster.
Yeah, you're getting renewable energy credit policy. It's led to
central planning. It's and is it that we are actually losing the knowledge, or is it the knowledge is being destroyed by central planning? I mean, I think
whether it's conscious or not.
I refer people a lot of times to the great F.A. Hayek article. Pretty short, but if you tell people to read it until you realize it's one of the most brilliant things ever written. But he talks about how it's like the particular knowledge of time and place, and how that's like accessible to individuals. And it's like they can't even really fully express why they know something. Or it's like he was saying, like, this is stuff that, will never be accessible to central planners, but it's coordinated via the price mechanism, right? I don't need to know why there is a shortage of aluminum. I don't even need to know that there's a shortage of aluminum. But I will respond to aluminum prices and take my scrap aluminum, to a junk dealer if the price gets like high enough to motivate me to do that. And he talks about how it's this thing. It's like it's clean because it's like it allows information to be transmitted efficiently. It would be inefficient for me to have to know why aluminum shorted, why the aluminum price was high. Right. The only thing that matters, the only piece of information that matters is the price, and how, price coordinates activity in that way. And the reason why, like, this is why you do not mess with prices, with price systems. And what is it but messing with price systems when you inject how much liquidity in 2020?
$6 trillion.
$6 trillion. Yeah. I think M2 money supply grew by, what's the figure? It's like 48% of all dollars have been minted in the last
3 years.
3 years, yeah.
4 years now.
4 years.
No, you go back on a lot. This is because I studied economics at college, and that's why I fell down. Not because I studied economics. I studied economics was they attempted to brainwash me with the Keynesian view, but luckily had a good professor in high school who was like, gentlemen, like, the Austrian view is right. Like, you should go study that where you can. So I read about it independently, and basically, like, early on in my Bitcoin journey, it was like running the numbers on monetary base, and literally from 1776 to 2008, the monetary base expanded from $0 to 850 billion. It took 120 odd years to go from 0 to 850 billion. Post 08 went from 850 billion to 6 trillion, like in the matter of 2 years. Now, fast forward where we are, it's above 20 trillion.
Yeah. Complete insanity.
In a very short amount of time.
And it doesn't just affect us. Because that's the reserve currency of the world, we are pushing this all onto everyone else. And I think that's a big cause of the international instability we see.
Yeah.
It's like, and how crazy inflation drives people. And then, like, you put that on the rest of the world, and it's, things are dire, It's,
That's why I think Bitcoin's an imperative. You get the sound money back. And then again, still, people have really not grasped the beauty of the intersection of Bitcoin mining and the energy sector. The fact that there's no such thing as stranded energy anymore. If you have the wherewithal, it's a pricing signal. You literally have this free energy that's stranded. For my personal miners, they're sitting on a stranded natural gas well that had no pipeline connectivity to get to midstream to get to the rest of the market. We bought a generator, a data center, mining equipment, went to the landowner, said, hey, your well's not being maintained. We'll pay your land lease for the year. Let us plug our generator into your gas line and mine Bitcoin with you. Like, sure. Mining is very cheap there.
It's amazing.
This exists everywhere.
Yeah.
Not only in Appalachia, across the world. And again, going back to energy is the basis of everything we do in our economy. The fact that you have this free market monetization of energy that is location agnostic is incredible. You don't only bring sound money to the world, but you bring a bootstrapping mechanism for energy systems around the world where you have a purchaser of that energy of first resort and last resort that can bootstrap a local energy economy.
Yeah. That's great. And it puts places like Appalachia back in the game.
Yeah.
You know, instead of like our financialized economy where it just becomes what are the financial pillars of the country, right? New York, San Francisco, and sort of thing. It brings it back to the core.
It's reversing Triffin's dilemma in real time. I mean, that off-grid example is just one example. Like part of a mining company that's doing on-grid operations in Appalachia in the same area as well. And basically what we do is we go to substations that were previously delivering electricity to large manufacturing facilities that have moved out long ago, decades ago. And so they're sitting with these substations with excess capacity that hasn't been utilized in over a decade. And we say, hey, you can get TVA to deliver you more electricity, fully utilize the substation, we'll buy the rest of that electricity. And since the TVA operates in a utility co-op with a mandate to keep prices low, they buy energy in bulk at lower prices, then they pass that down to residential consumers. Utility's more profitable, they can reinvest in their transmission lines, their substations, whatever it may be. And
it's amazing.
The narrative problem that Bitcoiners have to worry about is like, oh, this is job creation. It doesn't create that many jobs yet, but it can bring revenue and to utilities that will allow them to reinvest in tax revenue eventually. Then you can figure out how to bring jobs with that on the back end.
I am very much against job creation. I am fully med pilled. I don't like having a job particularly. I don't like working. I am pro wealth creation. I want the Bitcoin miners to, to pay for my robots that like do all this stuff. That would be, I don't, yeah, I mean, I understand where people are coming from. It's like, oh, the job's the way that's how they provide and all that. I get the importance of that, but so many of these jobs
are mindless.
And it's like they're actively, I think they're actively like destroying a lot of people. Right. So especially with the, the whole thing of like working inside under fluorescence.
That's what we said right now. That's what radicalized me towards Bitcoin too. I was working at a fund. It was great. I loved the people I worked with. It was a very interesting job. I got to learn a lot at a very young age, but the literal physical aspect of sitting in a cube, punching Excel functions, and just staring at a computer, pulling data from Bloomberg, crunching it, passing it every day, writing a commentary every once in a while. I was just like, God, this is soul sucking.
Yeah.
Humans were not meant to do that.
Not meant to do that at all. We were meant for cool stuff like the Eclipse. I loved people's reactions to it. Some people started cheering.
Oh.
Some people were, I felt moved by it. It was like a very spiritual experience to me. It was like, witnessing this show put on by God and just still in absolute awe. And we're very blessed too. Like the clouds moved just in time.
Right.
And we still had just like a little bit of cloud cover at certain moments during it that you could look at it without the glasses and see some of the colors. That was really cool. I was seeing like green and fuchsia and these different colors coming from the side when it was reaching full totality. like a real American patriot, I did stare at it bare-eyed.
I did as well. Yeah, I was at my house in my front yard. My oldest and my youngest one napped. It's his nap time. This is when totality hit. So he was napping. My wife, my oldest, and our neighbors were out in the front yard. It was cool to see the 4-year-old react to it. We got him all jacked up about like the moon's going to cover the sky, and
the crickets started chirping. The buzzards were like coming out from the trees and flying. There was a car like streaking up. We're kind of like on this prominent point, so you could like look down into hill country and see this one lone road sinking up, and this car's just like flying up like with the lights on and all. It was just like all of a sudden it just felt like the world was like gripped by this, wildness or something. It was quite the experience.
It was crazy seeing it, and it was cloud. Probably I imagine it was cloudier where we were, but likewise we had this moment of where it wasn't completely cloudless, but it was thin enough. The cloud layer was thin enough that you could see, like, without using the glasses, see totality. It was like this ominous black hole. Looked like a portal.
I had also got the idea right before, like as we were approaching full totality, that I should utilize the Bluetooth speaker from the campfire the night before. So I put on the 2001 Space Odyssey theme.
We were listening to
Richard Strauss.
We were listening. Oh no, we were listening to what the fuck's his name? David Bowie's Space Odyssey. Not 2001
Another great one.
Odyssey.
Another great one. Yeah, during part of it, also played a Total Eclipse of the Heart. So
it was a great day. It was hilarious too. What? That's how you know you have to get off social media. Like the 2-week lead up of the theories around the eclipse and CERN running at the same time. The portals opening.
Well, it turned out they turned CERN on, I think, Friday afternoon. I was like, wow, something has happened. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And then I realized I hadn't drank coffee all day, and I had just drank a 4-shot latte. I was like, oh no, it's the caffeine returning to my brain. No, some of that is, some of this stuff is fun. I like it for the posting aspect, but then like people start taking it really seriously. There has been some effect though. Like some people, a lot of people just like started acting kind of crazy in the days leading up to it. But I don't know if that was just like the mimetic aspect of that itself, or if, it was just making them kind of emotional, a little unhinged. Like people I knew, it was just like behaving a little out of sorts, saying things they wouldn't say otherwise, or this or that. But it's weird. And I was like, no, this is really the time, because like the last eclipse was the one that ushered in like the crazy years. So maybe this is like the undoing of it or something.
We're in the age of Aquarius now.
Age of Aquarius,
Great awakening.
Whatever you believe is like whatever will happen. So I think it's better to take these celestial events and put like the best possible spin on it. As it's a time of rebirth, and you can now change anything or let things go that no longer serve you. Instead of psyching yourself out, which if you do, I don't know. I'm a great believer in manifestation. Like if you intensely believe that something bad is going to happen, something bad will happen.
Yeah. And alternatively, if you intensely believe that you're going to make the world a better place, maybe you can. Maybe if you fix the money, you can fix the world if you believe it hard enough.
Yeah. I also say if you fix the lighting, you'll fix the world.
That's true.
That's what John's trying to do with the with the daylight. I'm going to send you guys some incandescent bulbs, though.
Thank you. I mean, we have these here. They're not bright enough. I can turn these down.
That was the real reason I didn't want to do video. There's a chance.
This actually is more pleasant now that I turned it down. Yeah, you can believe the world's going to be a better place and that you can affect change in that world, or you can believe the patriots are in control and fall down that rabbit hole and hope that somebody else will fix it for you. The patriots will fix it for you.
Well, if you do believe the patriots are in control, you should be the patriot who's in control.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good note to leave it off at, actually.
Yeah.
Be a patriot in control.
Be a patriot in control. Until next time, freaks, peace and love.